Hey, David Rooster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Alice in Chains. And Alice in Chains was formed in 1987 in Seattle, Washington. And I know for me personally, in the late 80s and early 90s, when music noticeably had this shift, during the alternative revolution, one of the first bands I noticed from that initial Seattle kind of push was Alice in Chains. And the song Man in the Box, popped up on MTV, and it was really dark and dreary, and they had the dude with the eyes sewn shut, and they're walking around in those robes and all that stuff, and it was visually very different than your typical, Motley Crue or Bon Jovi video or something, where it was usually girls and cars and parties and, bright lights. And then all of a sudden, it was like a little horror movie, and I thought, what is going on with this Alice in Chains band? And the vocal harmonies, a lot of fourths, which was really unusual for the time. And I know when I first heard that guitar solo, it had the Hendrix kind of overtones with a wah, real stratty or a G&L, kind of tone. And I was hooked. I was like, okay, I like this. It's like a horror movie, Hendrixy, it's dark, it's heavy, it's aggressive, and I became a fan. And definitely the album Dirt, which I think most people kind of consider that their greatest album. I mean, I love Dirt. And I was really obsessed with that when I was in school, in Atlanta at AIM. And, I saw Alice in Chains, actually. They opened for Van Halen. That would have been, that was like 91, I think. And that was in Indianapolis at what used to be called Deer Creek, which now it has a different name. But everybody still calls it Deer Creek. But Alice in Chains opened for Van Halen, which technically that's back when Sammy was in the band. And I was aware of Alice in Chains because I'd seen them on MTV. And I'll never forget, they came out, they started playing, and the crowd just started booing. And they started chanting, Van Halen, Van Halen. And I sat there and I looked around and I thought, that's really weird, they're getting booed, And they played, their whole set to boos and chants of Van Halen. And then at the end of their set, they finally played Man in the Box, and the whole crowd just erupted, and they started cheering, and everybody was singing, and, it was so weird to see the crowd flip like that, where they were angry and booing, and then singing along and so happy. And then, of course, Van Halen came out, and everybody, cheered, and everybody was happy. But I did see Alice in Chains. It was kind of an odd gig because there was so much booing in the beginning. But, legendary band for sure. And I'm definitely a big fan of Jerry Cantrell and the things he does with chords, too. Right, with the opening, that was the song Over Now, which is on the self-titled album, the one with the three-legged dog on the front. And I know when I first heard that song, I didn't realize it was in an open tuning, but I could hear there was something really different going on. So this lesson is going to completely be tuned down a half step, except for this example. This is tuned down a half step, and then we're in open D. So that's going to be a little unusual. But we basically have D flat, A flat, D flat, F, and then A flat, D flat would be the tuning. So open tunings are interesting because it changes your perspective of, where chords are, and it definitely changes the way you look at the neck because, we've changed the strings, we've changed the tuning. And certain shapes, aren't going to work, like they would, say, in standard tuning or in another tuning. But the interesting thing that's happening here is it starts with this F sharp, and he's really just kind of barring, the fourth fret right there. And then there's this single note line that's really kind of scale based. And then he's kind of flirting with like an F sharp 6 sus 2. Or I'm sorry, F sharp 6 sus 4 right there. And he's keeping that fourth fret barred, but then he's adding the sixth fret on the A and the fifth fret on the G. So slowly we've got... And there's where that F sharp 6 sus 4 comes in. And then you're going to do the exact same thing in D. So now we're going to move to open strings. And then there's the D and the D6 sus4. You know, really interesting guitar part, and it's creating these unusual chords with that open tuning. And like I said earlier, that's the only one that's going to be a little funky. Everything else after this is just regular half step down. All right, the next example is from Man in the Box from Facelift, and this is the first Alice in Chains song that most of you probably heard, you know, unless you lived in Seattle and saw them back in their club days or something like that. More than likely, most of you, you know, watching this, the first song you ever heard from Alice in Chains was this one. And it does kind of reveal, you know, Jerry's kind of unusual chord approach. And we're back in just regular, you know, down a half step. We're not an open, you know, open D anymore. So just regular, you know, down a half step tuning. And for this riff, really, you're just hearing the root note E played with a D, which is the flat 7. So it's kind of implying, you know, E7. But it's arranged in a very, you know, abstract and dissonant way, like this. And when you hear that riff, it's just crushing, you know, your ear, basically. It's wedging itself into your brain. And I know when I first heard that, it just sounded so off and dissonant and heavy. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so different, you know. And I like that. And that's all that riff needed, was just that open string and that one, you know, fretted note, but then combined with that groove and that energy and of course the distortion, and it's rocking. Next example is the song Junkhead from Dirt. And I know when I first heard this, I could hear he was bending chords. And I love when guitarists, you know, bend notes within chords, or they add a little bit of vibrato. And it creates, you know, this movement. You hear the chord, but then you hear it moving and it's doing something. And it's simple, but it's really cool. And you can see we're doing a B power chord, and then we're kind of smearing and bending those notes to a B flat, and then the B flat to a G, and then G flat, and you're going to bend and smear that around to F, down to E. It's one of those big monster riffs, you know, I mean, it sounds like something you'd hear in a Godzilla movie. You know, it's just massive, and it's, you know, kind of sludgy and really cool. But next we have the song Rooster, which is from the album Dirt. And funny story, I used to work in a music store, and I was teaching, and one of my friends was doing sales. And I remember a period of time, I mean, every day when I would walk in to start my day of teaching, he would sing this song to me, but he changed the lyrics, and he'd sing, yeah, here comes Dave Brewster. And of course we'd start laughing or whatever, and I always thought that was hilarious. But the chords in Rooster are really cool. And I know when I first heard the song, my ears perked up, and I thought, hey, what's Jerry, you know, doing with the chords there? And you can find these chords also hiding in songs from Rush, Dream Theater, and there's a bunch of songs out there that have these same chords in it. But we're going to start with this F sharp major chord. And then he's basically going to keep the bottom part of the chord, and he's going to open up the B and the high E string. And when you do that, that's going to change it to an F7 add 11, or an F sharp 7 add 11. And you've got this really dreamy, you know, spacious sound. think I was trying to say spacey, but very dreamy and atmospheric, you know, flavor in that chord. And then we're going to take that movement and move it to A. And then if we do that same movement there where we open up, you know, the B and the high E, that's going to change it to an A add 9. And the 9, you know, is that open B string right there. Grabs you from the moment you hear it. It's like, wow, what is going on there? And, you know, great song too. For another look at Jerry kind of using those, you know, atmospheric chords, the song No Excuses, which is from Jar of Flies, that also uses the same chords. And now we're going to be moving between an A and a B. And that's technically, you know, still that A add 9 and then a B add 11. So we're doing this. See, between the A add 9 and that B add 11, it eventually moves down to this G6. And then just ends with an E major chord, just a cowboy, you know, E major down there. But really cool, and I love those chords. You know, it creates this, you know, droning open string kind of spacious sound. And I'm a big prog rock fan, so anytime I hear chords like that in prog rock or metal or any style, you know, it grabs my attention where it's like, I know what chords those are, you know, and they sound really cool. The last example's from the song Wood, which is also from Dirt, and this is a really interesting chord-based, you know, guitar part. And Jerry's kind of flirting with an F sharp, you know, power chord, like an F sharp 5 right here. And he's also hammering on from the 4th right there, that B note. And then after he hammers on into the F sharp 5, it changes to a little piece of a G major, kind of an implied G major. And then he kind of plays through this little G6 right there. And the interesting thing is you're going to hear a higher version of this riff first, and then it dips down and goes an octave lower, which I love when you know, guitarists do things like that, because you hear it, you know, kind of higher in the beginning, and then it drops, and then you hear it, you know, a lower version of it later. Like this. Cool, and it's really dark and gritty, but there's the hammer on into that F sharp 5, and then it's going to change, like I said, to G, like a little piece of G major. And that little G6 right there, and then repeat that part again. And then he does the G6 again, but it's an octave lower, so it's down here. And then that's just going to hammer on into an F sharp power chord, you know, an open position down here. And then there's your little piece of G, you know, that low G note and that B right there, which is sick, but it's so cool. That's going to wrap this look at the Chords of Alice in Chains, and definitely Jerry Cantrell is a legendary, you know, guitarist on the scene. He's been on the scene since '87, So he's definitely been around for a while, and I know there's a lot of players out there that still respect him and the music he made with Alice in Chains. And yeah, there's some sad, tales and stories kind of associated with the band, especially surrounding Lane Staley. And Alice in Chains has continued. They've acquired a different singer, and they've released some additional music since Lane died. But there is something kind of lingering, like that memory of how the band used to sound and what they used to do. And they've changed a little bit, but it's still a great band. Jerry's still a phenomenal musician. And I'm definitely a fan. So leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.